as president, CEO, and board member for 16 years. Embrex was a homegrown, publicly traded North Carolina-based biotech company focused on the global poultry industry. Embrex had revenues of nearly $55 million in 2006, more than 320 employees worldwide, with operations in all major poultry-producing countries. Before Embrex, Randy worked as VP of American Cyanide's International Animal Health Business for 5 years, and also spent 10 years with Monsanto's agricultural products company in both domestic and international Asia sales, marketing, and product management. Sorry if I butchered some of those names. Randy is a 1974 graduate of the University of Kansas with a BA in International Relations and East Asian Studies. He is also a Vietnam veteran and was a chief warrant officer, helicopter pilot in the U.S. Army. He is currently an executive coach for the MBA Leadership Immersion Program at the University of North Carolina, and is also a member of the Board of Advisors for the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Kansas in Lawrence. He and his wife, Linda, live near Creedmoor, NC, and now have 2 adult sons.
Thank you. I guess that's my cue. Thanks for having me. I want to thank Pam for reaching out, 6, 8 weeks ago, whenever it was. As you'll soon find out, I've known Pam for a very long time, when she was maybe your age or a little younger. And Hannah also was very instrumental in pulling together the slides from some stuff that I had pulled together over the years and turned them into a proper PowerPoint, which is something I have no expertise at. So as a friend of mine says, content by me, mistakes by Apple. But I'm not going to say that. So, at Embrex especially, just to give you a little history, when I worked for Monsanto for 10 years in sales and marketing, I thought Monsanto's approach to managing their people and establishing goals and holding folks accountable was really a pretty positive one. Then I went to American Cyanamid, and American Cyanamid's approach was really, what does this month's income statement look like? And we'll change what we're going to do and how we evaluate you on that basis. So I said, if I ever have the opportunity to do it myself, I'm going to use the Monsanto model, but I think it needed to go a little bit further. So this is sort of an evolution over 16 years, I guess, when I was at Embrex. Pam was very instrumental in some of this because she was our first real HR director. But it was really an iterative process. So hopefully there'll be something here you can take away, something you can hold folks at DUDE in the executive roles as accountable for, and also maybe some of the things that will apply to you as you do your work or as you live your life. I also want to do a shout out. I guess there are people from DUDE Solutions in Paulsboro, Washington, and Toronto. I guess you're online, and soon to be maybe Grand Junction, Colorado. If you're a sports nut, outdoor sports nut, apply for that job. Hannah gave a little introduction. I was with Advanced Animal Diagnostics as executive chairman, and I guess I need to click this forward. What am I doing? There we go. As executive chairman at Advanced Animal Diagnostics, and the fun thing about that was I was asked for input, but I didn't have to deal with the responsibility. So we really had a chance to kind of work on this and modify it and make it work for a completely kind of different company, really early stage venture back. I think we introduced this at Advanced Diagnostics when there were 5 or 6 folks in the room and in the entire company. So you could sit down at a table and say, what are our goals? But we wanted to go through a formalized process just a little bit. The goal setting process. The objective really is to achieve goals to the maximum level of attainment and to the highest possible standards. The goal setting process, I think, is really important because if you establish those collaboratively, everybody knows what's going on. Everyone knows how their goals tie to DSI and maybe more importantly, each other. You've got a goal, I've got a goal in a related area. We're going to have to work together so we can mutually accomplish those goals. So it was important to think through the goals appropriately and in a collaborative way, and then continue to monitor accomplishment against those goals, again, collaboratively. We said, we called this joint accountability. So who else do I need in this organization to help me achieve my goals, and what do I have to do to help them achieve their goals? It created ownership. That's your goal. You've got to accomplish it. It also created the opportunity to say, if that's my goal and I'm being held accountable to accomplish it, I'm going to need some resources to do that. So it gave you, or it gave the individual, the opportunity to provide some feedback. If that's the goal, I'm going to need these kinds of financial resources. I'm going to need these kinds of hardware resources. I'm going to need these kinds of travel resources. And it created a really good atmosphere, I wouldn't say of negotiation, although that's sometimes what it came down to, but it also created a really good kind of quid pro quo, and you were held accountable for asking for those resources, not just saying, I don't have the resources to do it, so I can't achieve that goal. And it established a basis for those dreaded exercises called a performance evaluation or a performance appraisal. But you know, if you do them on a monthly basis, which is what we did because we reviewed our goals in a senior team meeting on a monthly basis, there were no surprises. You could adjust. If you were having a performance issue, you found out about it. You found out about it in the context of a goal, not that you've got a bad personality or there's something wrong with you that's creating an issue that says you can't achieve your goal. If that was the case, we also tried to find that out and generate the kind of help that perhaps a person needed to get over a personal issue that was having an impact on the way they worked. Real clarity, real ownership, and I think it did allow us to achieve goals to the maximum level of attainment and to the highest possible standards. Because when you set a goal, oftentimes you really don't know how the year is going to turn out. So you can manage that in an iterative way as the year evolves. This jumped. If done well, you should achieve the proper balance between the interest of your customers. They're really important. They're the ones that give you money for something you're providing them. Your shareholders, they're the ones that provide the capital, so they're pretty important too. And employees. And you're really important, and I would say the key, because this is where the work gets done. You do the work. You come up with the ideas. And if you generate those ideas, you're rewarded appropriately and you're compensated appropriately. Customers will receive value and shareholders will receive the return they expect. I understand you've got a very big shareholder who's involved in DSI. It's important to generate for them the kind of return that they expect, but also to allow you to continue to have access to the resources that they're in a position to provide. You're the most important. This is the way I think we operated at Imbrex, and I trust you operate here that way as well. The quid pro quo is if you've got that support, if you're first, it's high expectations. And when you talk about high expectations, one of the things that I think was important for us at Imbrex was this phrase. And we had some real challenges. We had some work that was really difficult that we didn't know if we were going to pull it off. Long hours, hard work, a lot of frustration, a lot of mistakes, but we tried to make Imbrex a really easy place to work. So it may be difficult, it may be challenging, but man, I don't have any hassles with a bad boss, or if we did, we tried to get those fixed. We tried to make Imbrex an easy place to work and make that distinction, because lots of times the work itself was not easy. It was frustrating, it was challenging, it was hard, and we had lots of failures. One of the sayings we had at Embrex was, we were too stupid to know it couldn't be done. And there was a lot of truth to that. Those high expectations, they really, really matter. And you should challenge yourself to have those high expectations of yourself, but also don't let your teammates and your fellow workers off the hook either. Hold them accountable for those high expectations. That's where that goal setting process can come back in and make a difference. And at Embrex, we said we all needed to be creative. We all needed to be really flexible, because the job you're doing today may not be the job you're going to do tomorrow afternoon. And we didn't want people to hide behind it. Well, that's not my job. That's Charlie's job. We didn't want people to, we wanted ownership. Supportive, okay, it's a challenge, but you know, we can do it. Take the initiative to accomplish things. Push people, stretch, step out when you didn't necessarily know you could pull it off. Take risks. Don't sit back, jump in, do it. Take on assignments, not job titles. And that one would make me flare. Well, that's not my job. Well, I don't see the person whose job it is because it just came up. As a CEO, one does a lot of things that really aren't your job. I can remember being the 26th employee at Embrex. When a truck came in with parts, I'd jump in and help unload those trucks. Wasn't my job, but it was a job that needed to be done. Exploit your strengths. We'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. Make mistakes. Fix your weaknesses. Train and coach and grow, grow, grow. I got a little story here that I'm going to tell on one of your colleagues, because Pam and I have known each other for a long time. I was her first CEO. She was our first HR director, which really wasn't a job she was looking for. I came in early to work one morning, and the HR director that we had at the time was also our IT person, and she was much more skilled at IT than she was at HR. She had a second person working for her, and that person came into my office about 7:30 that morning, crying. Huge trauma. There had been a huge flare-up between those two. It was personal, it was professional, it was unprofessional, and this had kind of been bubbling underneath the surface. Pam had just moved, I think, from being a part-time employee at Embrex to a full-time employee at Embrex, and was doing a lot of the clerical work and a lot of the detail work. Pam walked in, and I think my conversation with Pam went something like this. In a few minutes, Pam, I'm going to go fire our HR person. I want you to be our new HR person. And I said, we'll support you with whatever you need. I think Pam did a gulp. She walked into her office. She came back and said, okay, I'm going to need this kind of training if I'm going to do it. And she did it. She exploited her strengths. She was creative. Man, was she flexible that morning. And I was pretty flexible as well. She was an initiator. She decided to stretch herself. And she also decided to take a huge risk. But she had the support of us. She had the initiative. She had the right personality. She didn't have the training per se, but we can provide that. And she's a really, really good example of somebody stepping up when she could have said, geez, I'm not ready for this. That's not my job. I'm just really happy filling out paperwork. Yes, sir.
An example of what you mean by not defend job titles?
Okay, well, I'm an engineer. I'm the CEO. I don't unload trucks. okay? I'm an engineer. I do creative stuff. I want to walk by and ignore the trash that's on the floor. I mean, it's little stuff and it's big stuff. But hiding behind your job title, that's not my job, is really kind of what we're talking about here. It may not be your job, and it may be pretty distasteful and something you don't want to do, but if you're there and it needs to be done, step up. I'm going to talk about this one just a little bit. And I'm going to ask some questions. You can think about it yourself. You can hold your hand up if you want. How many of you would characterize one or more of these words as a strength of yours? An achiever. Yeah, there won't be very many who are negative on any of these. An activator. In other words, you're kind of the spark plug to get stuff going. Adaptive. Ah, yeah, I can jump in. Analytical. I mean, given a software company, I would expect that. A lot of folks, damn it, you're too analytical. You got to be a little more creative, which leads me to my next one, creative. A communicator. An arranger. You're the person that pulls everything together. Competitive. Okay. Deliberative. I'll get back to you on that. Give me a little time to think about it. Empathetic. Ideas, an idea generator. Bing, 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 bing. You're all over the place. Okay. Positive. Always upbeat. We can do this. We can figure it out. Responsible. Yeah, I'll cover that. Strategic. The reason I ask that is that really builds on strengths. And one of the things that I think is really, really important is not to focus on your weaknesses and try to get those sorted out. Get those to the point where they don't matter, they don't get in the way, they don't cause problems for you, but focus on your weaknesses. I mean, focus on your strengths and continue to build those strengths. Somebody who's this tall, regardless of how hard they work, is never going to play college or pro basketball. Sorry about that. But they could do some other things really, really well. So really think that through and focus on your... And some of you may have an opportunity, depending on if you ask a question, and someone just did, to maybe get a little bit of a head start on thinking through some of those strengths. I've got 3 more books, so whoever asks questions, and I'm sure Pam and Hannah will get some more of those, maybe even have a session or 2 as a result. That's what I really spoke to in terms of strength finders, and this book will help you understand your strengths and maybe put some words around those. If you want, it's like $20 on Amazon. We also spent a lot of time really thinking through what doesn't matter. Now, this is from the perspective of an employee and an employer and somebody in a company, okay? This doesn't necessarily speak to your off-work activities, etc. And it's what we will never care about. And I want to emphasize that this, what we don't care about, isn't meant to be tough or mean-spirited. We mean it in the kindest, most gentle way possible. We found that at Embrex, if we focused on a diversity of the mind and a diversity of a thought process, the other issues associated with diversity generally went away or diminished hugely in terms of importance in the work environment. So what we said at Embrex, we don't care how old you are, as long as you can get the job done. We don't care where you went to school, whether it's University of Kansas or Wake Tech or NC State. You have to be trained for the job, but we're not looking for a Harvard or a Yale pedigree. So in that regard, don't come in and flash your flashy credentials around. We want you to get to work and have the competency that you need to get that job done. We don't care about your background. Farm, didn't matter. Nationality, I think we had 30 different nationalities working for us at Embrex. And it's a real challenge to negate kind of the importance of those nationalities because, you know, the British and the French have issues sometimes. But down the hall, sometimes we had issues as well. So we try to say, look, you're here to do a job. Focus on the job. Park that stuff at the door if you possibly can. Race, the same. Gender, the same. Appearance, we didn't care. We didn't care what your religion was. If you had a faith-based orientation to things, we tried to respect that. Disabilities, you get the job done. We're not going to put you someplace that's inappropriate, but we really don't care as long as you can perform. Work hours, you guys are pretty flexible here. We had some core hours at Embrex, but it wasn't, oh, he's not a very good employee because he's not hitting it hard here in the office 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. People could take advantage of that and abuse it, but they also understood if it was abused, it might disappear. So there was this process of holding each other accountable for some of these performance-related things. Dress codes, I see it pretty flexible here as well. Ours was 2 words, decently covered. And we only had a few violations, I think, in 15 or 16 years. They were very flagrant, but we only had a few. Politics, we don't care what your politics are. Park that at the door. Org charts, yeah, every organization has an org chart, but as opposed to a reporting relationship, we tried to get people, again, because we were focused on goals, and if we were accomplishing those goals, people understood what was theirs and what they were accountable for. But if you needed a decision or you needed to define the process, yeah, this person's your boss. Go talk to them about it. Marital status, we didn't really care. I'm a veteran. We didn't really care. There was a whole lot of stuff that we realized wasn't important, so we're not going to get our knickers in a twist about any of them. And I think that's really important. I have a phrase sometimes that I use, especially when people start getting wrapped around the axle, and I call it my rule of 3s. Will this matter in 30 seconds? Will this matter in 3 minutes? Will this matter in 30 minutes? Will this matter in 3 days? Will this matter in 3 weeks? Will this matter in 3 months? Will this matter in 3 years? It kind of helps you put this stuff that gets to you a little bit in perspective. This cultural contract, we strive to create a work environment in which you can be the best dude you can be as quickly as possible. Your obligation is to take the initiative. Don't wait, just do it. And Pam's a great example of that in the story I shared with you about Pam. She jumped right in. She took advantage of the opportunity and got it done. Now, these are some phrases I've picked up over the years. Most of them aren't mine. A couple are, but they're kind of Randy's phrases. I share them with my sons, 33, 34, and 30 years old, and they, oh, Dad, but you know, they circle back around to them from time to time. This one I think is one you need to be thoughtful about. Evaluate yourself and others, holding other people accountable by asking these 3 questions. What do you believe in and why? Think about that. Do you know what you're talking about? And do you have the courage of your convictions? Just another way of confirming your values, your competency, and your confidence. A related one to this is something I call Randy's riddle. What three things do you have that no one can take away from you, but if you lose one, it destroys the value of the other two? What would those three things be? And I think it's especially appropriate for folks that are roughly your age. I'll go ahead and give you the answer. Your reputation, your experience, and your education. And if you destroy your reputation, you've destroyed the value of the other two. And we see so many examples of people who have destroyed their reputation in a big way, but there's also little ways to do that. Always late to a meeting, never prepared. You know, can't seem to get to a flight on time. They always miss flights. There's big and little ways to do that. But think about Randy's riddle, because, and it's so easy now with social media to do something that dings that reputation. Be careful what you say, where you go, what you do, especially in a work context, because your education and your experience are invaluable. But if you don't have your reputation, you know, as the French would say, what's the value? Always have a goal. I beat on this one. What's our goal here? What's our objective in this meeting? What are we going to accomplish this afternoon? What's the key thing we've got to get done next week? What's it need to look like when it's done? How will we know we're there? All those goal-related things, I think, are really, really important. You go to the grocery store, you've got a goal. I'm going to buy groceries. I'm going to be done in 30 minutes, and I've got to spend less than $50. It's a goal. You just do it. And it's amazing how many meetings you walk into and you kind of stumble around and somebody says, what's our goal here 15, 20 minutes into the meeting? Oh, that's a really good question. We ought to focus on that for just a little bit. Never underestimate the value of a really good, bad example. There are so many of them. Or a really good, bad experience. Something good happens, we always say, wow, that was neat. I'm going to remember that. Something bad happens, kind of our brain kicks into, oh, I'm going to forget that. No, learn about it. What happened here? What can I do to avoid dealing with that again? You see these over and over again. Loose tight. With tightly focused goals, one can often delegate the steps necessary to accomplish those goals, especially if expertise is involved that you don't have. I was in animal and crop agriculture my entire career. I've got a degree in international relations and East Asian studies, but I had veterinarians and engineers and software folks and salespeople and animal husbandry folks. Lots of folks from NC State worked for us. How did you manage that? You articulated the goals, and then you provided the opportunity for the people who were experts in those areas to accomplish those goals and get out of the way. Optimism's determination dressed up with a smile. You can look around and say, okay, that person's always pretty optimistic. They're determined. They make things happen. They always got a smile on their face. Raisins don't belong in cookies. Keep it simple. Raisins, as far as I'm concerned, don't belong in anything, but they sure don't belong in cookies. Now, pecans do and chocolate chips do. And I explained this to one of my MBA students at UNC one time, and she said, I don't get it. And then she thought a little bit, and she said, oh, olives don't belong in pizzas. So she got it. Are you the smartest person in the room, or are you the most effective? Think about that one, especially in the context of a meeting. And then think about, who does your teammate want, or who does your boss want? You want the person that's the most effective. And we all have dealt with people who try to be the smartest person in the room, and you walk out and you kind of say, I don't need any more of that. So focus on being effective. Contribution concept, are you creating or contributing more than you cost? Are you creating value? In every interaction or every interchange, what have you done that contributes to dude's solutions? What have you done that contributes to your team? What have you done that contributes to your customers? Are you contributing more than you cost? You make $100,000 a year, you ought to look at yourself a little bit in that context and say, am I generating a return that would cause a shareholder to be satisfied with their investment in me? What is that number? Is it $50,000 additional on top of a $100,000 salary? I don't know what that number is, but you should think about yourself in that context. Today, did I do something that will allow my boss to say, you can come back tomorrow because you generated a nice return today? It's a little granular, but it's a good way to think about what you're doing, what you're on. Understand the difference between difficult work and a difficult place to work. We talked about that one a little bit. And this last one, don't beat yourself up if you don't get there all at once. Progress is seldom exponential. It's almost always incremental. Can you, at the end of the day, say, more days than not, whatever it was I did today, I did just a little bit better than I did it yesterday? You're not going to have those days 100% of the time, but if you're batting 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, some weeks 2 out of 5, that's a good way to kind of measure yourself and think about it. I like this one a lot, although there's no magic formula. Everyone has something extraordinary about them. May drive you nuts, but if you step back and reflect a little bit, there is something extraordinary about everybody you come in contact with. Your job's to find it and develop it and maximize its impact, whether it's your boss, a subordinate, or a peer. What's really extraordinary about you? Just because you have a say doesn't mean you have a vote. So you throw an idea out and it doesn't seem to go anyplace. It's not the end of the world. Hopefully you feel like you've made a contribution, you have a say, and you've given folks a chance to respond to that. The dog on the porch finds no bones. Sort of makes sense. But then I like the second question better. What would you do if you weren't afraid? Whatever that is, personal life, professional life, here at work, how would I deal with this if I weren't afraid? Some consequence? What could you accomplish if there wasn't that little nagging something sitting in the back of your head saying, hey, you better watch out here? Ask yourself that question from time to time. What would I do in this situation if I wasn't really afraid about what somebody would say or about the chance that it might be a mistake, etc.? This may come out in the strength finders. Leadership jazz. Are you cut out to lead, be in an orchestra, or lead, or be in a jazz combo? What kind of job are you really comfortable in? You're third violinist. You've got your music score. The conductor cues the violinist in. You're there. You're ready. You're done playing your part. You flip to the next page. You get your music ready. You wait for the conductor to bring the violinist in. Orchestras make beautiful music, but it's not necessarily the only way to make beautiful music. If you're in a jazz combo, you might be 5 or 6 of you. That can be pretty ad hoc. You don't know if you're going to take a solo, who's going to take the solo, how long the set's going to be. And I do think folks are more comfortable in one kind of an environment than they are in the other. So think about yourself just a little bit there. Where do I really, really thrive? Now, the jazz musician probably went to school for music, so they understand that. The violinist can probably do an improv or take a solo if they really need to. But most folks typically are more into one than the other. Periodically ask yourself what you really care about matters as well as what you don't care about and what doesn't matter. That's kind of that rule of 3s. Is this going to be important? What matters? What doesn't matter? And one thing I think to keep in mind, no one who loves you will stand over your grave and say, I wish you had spent more time at the office. somebody who hates you may say something like that, but no one who stands over. We talk a lot about work-life balance, and I'm not sure there's such a thing as a work-life balance, but I think there is something where you can reach an equilibrium, where you're comfortable with both sides of that equation, what you need to do professionally and what you need to do for your person, and you can reach an equilibrium. It's probably never going to be 50-50, and it will evolve over time. There were times when I was traveling and we were putting together our international business. I was gone for 2 and 3 weeks at a time. There was no balance there, but there was equilibrium over a long period of time. Last slide, we'll go to questions. Life's too short to have a bad time. And he founded Tyson Foods, the chicken folks, was a customer of ours, and Don Tyson managed to have a real good time most of the time and put together a really interesting company in the process. That's it. Thanks for your attention. Any questions or thoughts, or you're full of it, makes no sense?
Remote folks, go ahead and type your questions up, and then I can ask on your behalf as well.
Sure. Yeah, that's for them, not me.
Regarding the contribution concept, what are some suggestions you have for self-evaluating if you really are contributing more than you're costing?
Yeah, I mean, the inclination is to think about that in dollars and cents, because that's kind of what we're all used to. And if you read Wall Street Journal and companies make investments, they've got an expected return. And, you know, if you invest in a stock, you're kind of hoping you'll get something back in due course. I don't think it has to be as granular as that, but I think we all kind of know at the end of the day or at the end of the week that, yeah, that worked out pretty well. I'm feeling pretty good about that meeting, about completing that project, about bringing it in ahead of schedule and under budget. We all just kind of know if we're really listening to ourselves. You can also ask for a little feedback. It makes you a little bit more vulnerable. How'd I do on that project? You look like you were a little concerned about something I said. Tell me about it just a little bit more. There's a nice little way of doing feedback that I learned at UNC in the MBA program. It's called SBIA. Stands for Situation, Behavior, Impact, and Alternative. So if you are giving feedback, here was the situation, Hannah. So you refer back to a meeting. I noticed you were really anxious about something. The impact it had on the rest of the meeting was it was kind of shut down and everybody was looking to you for something and you weren't very forthcoming. An alternative would have been perhaps to go ahead and get it off your chest. Let us know what's going on so we don't wonder. SBIA, it's a nifty little tool. We use it a lot. Sort of answer your question?
What was the basic
SBIA, Situation, Behavior, Impact, and Alternative. And you can use this both for kind of being a little critical in your feedback, but it's just as useful being positive in your feedback. Wow, Hannah, you were really enthused yesterday in that meeting. What got you so excited? It just had a positive effect on everybody in the meeting. So it works both ways. Feedback doesn't always have to be, you got to fix something.
Randy, over your career and your experience, did you ever find that managing what you didn't know grew in importance at all?
That's a really, yeah, I mean, I had to learn, you know, what a veterinarian does when they look at a chicken. I had to understand diseases and all the rest of it. But I never felt that I had to be the expert in the room because folks were trained for that. My thinking was, if I could explain this to an investor or a customer in such a way that they would understand it and maybe be interested in buying it, that's kind of the depth of knowledge that I needed. But I never wanted to compete, because I couldn't, with, you know, that subject matter expert. We needed to hire those folks really well, and we looked for all the right kinds of traits that they brought to the table. And Pam will be the first to tell you, most of the time we got it right, but sometimes we didn't. And that kind of speaks to looking at your peers and figuring out where they're coming from. I had a kind of joking, but it was also serious. Most employees are painters. So we want to paint this room gray. We want it to match, you know, the carpet. We don't want anything fancy. Yes, sir, I'll get the paint can out, and I'll get the roller out, and I'm going to paint it. I'm going to take those door plates off. I'll figure that out so I don't paint over the door plates, etc. Most folks, I think, are painters. Most of us are probably painters in some aspect of our life. Some folks are artists. Oh, this room would look much better in gray than it would in green or purple or orange. So we're going to determine that this is going to be a gray room. That's kind of the artist. And then there are a few folks that I put in the category of geniuses. God, I can't figure them out. Please don't let a customer see them. They may not be able to be employed anyplace else, but they're extremely valuable. They may be a huge headache to manage. This stuff may just go right over their heads. But man, you understand the contribution they can make. I'm not saying coddle them, but understand the aggravation and pain that they can cause, and the kind of value they can create. You can't have a lot of geniuses. 2 or 3 is probably, you're what, about 700 folks? Probably a half a dozen is about all Pam could deal with. But recognize that, you know, unless they're abusive or just a bad person, there's a place for lots of different folks in a company this size, and they can all contribute value. And you have an obligation as a fellow employee is to try to, what's going on in there? You know, help me out a little bit. Hold me accountable for the book.
I will, thank you.
I've got one book left, but we can go on for.
Randy, so you mentioned making use of the bad experiences. Mm-hmm. Is there anything, I'm not trying to ask you to go back on any bad experience, but I'm just curious too, when you were coming up as an executive, when you think back to some of the, you call them learning experiences, mm-hmm. you know, do any jump out at you if you were to, you know, advise a group or advise on, hey, if I could go back and change this situation?
What I didn't say, the reason I ended up in Embrex in North Carolina was because I got fired from my job as the VP of International Animal Health for American Cynomid, because I had a fellow who was my boss. He was the president of the division at the time. And as the British would say, we were chalk and cheese. I was strategic. He was, you know, this afternoon's income statement, not tomorrow's, but today's. And looking back on that, I could have managed that better with a lot more intelligence. But, you know, he caused me to flare, and man, I could flare. And he had the power and I didn't. Just because I had a say didn't mean I had a vote. That was a really good, bad experience, because I ended up in North Carolina heading up a little company that we were able to really grow successfully. And sell to Pfizer for a nice multiple, and it took care of all our employees and and all of our officers, and it also took care of shareholders, and it also ensured that the technology that we introduced to the poultry industry continued to be out there. So what I should say is, if you eat chicken, the chicken you eat today or tomorrow was vaccinated by the process that we developed at Embrex, because about 90% of the poultry industry in the U.S. uses that approach, and probably 45 or 50% on a global basis uses that approach. And that's also gratifying for me. But that was a really good, bad experience. I didn't realize it at the time. So on reflection, you know, wow, that was the best, worst thing that ever happened to me.
Thanks for sharing.
There you go.
Thank you.
I'm gonna ask one. What is the self-evaluation process for determining your strengths and your weaknesses in order to do some of that personal goal setting?
I like a really simple process. These are whiteboards, right? Or the equivalent. Is there a? Here's one. It doesn't have to be complicated. And this kind of goes back to the really learning from a really good bad experience or really bad good experience. Just take a piece of paper and do like this. And periodically at the end of the day, just think about a situation or something that occurred, something you contributed to or should have contributed to, and chalk that up. Was that positive for me? Can I learn from it? Or was it a negative? And can I learn from that as well? Doesn't have to be complicated. And I think the important thing is a little bit less the process. This is really simple. But it's more about taking 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes periodically. Maybe it's the end of the day, maybe it's the end of the week. And just say, all right, what can I put in my positive stuff? What can I put in my negative stuff? And how should I think about that in terms of either fixing a weakness or building on a strength? Really simple. I think both my sons do this, I think. They've never shared those books with me, but I think they do.
We have one online question. It says, business is business, but at the Dude, we have a fairly unique culture, and sometimes it's hard not to be emotional about decisions that are made from the top down. Can you give some advice about when you would recommend to speak up and when to stay quiet?
Ooh, yeah, I mean, I'm an expert on Dude solutions now after being in here for an hour. So I think the considered answer is I probably can't, but my sense of the place is that input is generally more welcome than it isn't. And you may recall I did say something like, just because you have a say doesn't necessarily mean you have a vote. And make sure you're heard. Do it appropriately, do it thoughtfully, think it through. What's the goal of the comment that you're going to make? Or, you know, what's my objective here if I'm going to communicate something that I'm uncomfortable with about what's coming from the top down? Think all that through. I'm not saying you have to be political necessarily, but use common sense. But keep in mind that it's probably not personal, okay? So you've had a say, you perhaps didn't have a chance to vote. And then also use that rule of threes again. Is this really going to matter in my life and in my team and what we're trying to do in 3 minutes, in 3 hours, in 3 days, in 3 years, 10 years, 30 years? Kind of help put it in perspective. I hope that helped.
There's a follow-up question to that and says, can you explain how to get from having a say to having a vote? What is the process for that?
Work really hard on your career and do all the stuff that I said so that you can become a manager or a director or a VP or whatever. And I joke about it a little bit, but if it's important for you to have a say, allow that to motivate you a little bit so that you manage your career and the jobs you take in the context of that goal, which is I want to be in a position to have a say, and take advantage of those opportunities. You know, it was the last thing on Pam's mind that she was going to be the senior VP of HR at Dude Solutions years ago. But she took advantage of the opportunity. And you may not know that at this point. I mean, I didn't want to be a CEO necessarily. I wanted to work internationally and be about 6 hours, 6 time zones away from my boss. And we lived in Tokyo for about 3 years initially. That was the greatest job I ever had. I came back to the US, wasn't particularly sold on that, but as my career evolved, ended up at some place that was really, really good and really gratifying. So it's okay not to know at this point. And you'll all, given your age, you're going to have something happen in the next 5 or 6 or 10 years that's going to be unexpected. And, you know, put it in the context. Is this a really good, bad experience, or is this going to be a really good, good experience? Use that perspective.
Thank you, Randy.
Thank
we
you.
appreciate you coming today.
It was fun. Have Pam buy you the books. And the secret to the book is there's a little scratch-off code in the back. And you can go online. You respond to a 20 or 30-minute kind of test. And then you'll get an email back in the next day or two that says, these are your 5 top strengths. It describes what those strengths are. And then a person who has these strengths basically says and does stuff